Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. This episode has been made possible with the generous support of Coimisiún Meán, and we are delighted to welcome our contributor Naemi Victoria, who is a writer, a visual artist and a PhD candidate. She'll be chatting with former contributor, writer and director of all things horror and hilarity, Conor McMahon.
You studied at IADT, right? Like you got into film there. How and why film?
Yeah. It was funny. I was talking to somebody last night, and they're a carpenter, right, in film. But I think we all had like this similar experience as a kid where something just hit us when that's what I have to do. Like for me, I kind of remember it wasn't so much making films. We had a video camera in my house that was used for communions, confirmations, that kind of thing. And one day I remember filming one of my brothers. I filmed him from one angle. It was a very simple scene. He was just punching my other brother in the face. That was the scene. And I shot it from two angles, and I paused, because we had no editing back then. So you just had to pause and then change the angle and record and whatever. And so when that was edited together, it looked like my brother had punched my other brother, even though he hadn't, and I could go around and show my mother. And there was something in that power of being able to do that just like the possibilities of what I could do. And then that evolved, I suppose, into more like short, like little movies or scenes. I suppose at the start, you're always imitating, like we're imitating what we were watching. So, I mean, it must have been the Tarantino era because we were making us in suits and walking around and shooting guns. And then we were doing Shakespeare in school. So I was making Shakespeare, films and so all sorts. And then for some reason, the horror movies, they always just got the best reactions, like the most strongest reactions. And people were always like, oh, when are you going to do another horror? So for me, I don't know. And maybe because I didn't grow up I wasn't really allowed to watch horror movies, or I didn't really it more was the thing I was making. And then maybe in parallel to that, I started watching, and I noticed when I saw Evil Dead 2, I could see the possibilities of camera work suddenly, that was the thing I always, if there was any sort of, you kind of wonder, are you pre-programmed? Is there something that you're just waiting to see something and the thing just sparks, And when I saw the camera work in Evil Dead 2, I was just like, oh my God, I don't know what that is, but I want to recreate that. Or that was, and horror and that kind of more, I guess, elaborate camera work, they kind of would sink, Like you couldn't do that so much with a regular drama. So yeah, that sort of the origins.
If you didn't
anyway.
watch horror films growing up though, what were your top three go-to films? The first film where you kind of realized, okay, horror might be a genre I'd be interested in, and then now your top three looking back on it.
The films I really the big films that impacted me, I guess, would have been Spielberg movies. I remember seeing Duel, get my hands on a copy of Duel, and the camera work was the thing that always was the thing I recognized first. Some people probably recognize story first. I know there are times when I would probably know every shot in The Last Crusade or those movies. So the way he used the camera to reveal story or reveal things just would mesmerize me. I'd watch those movies gone, and I was thinking nobody can do it like him. It was just incredible how he used the camera, and that had a big impact. So my movies that I've rewatched would have been Jewel, E.T., Poltergeist. I know he kind of wrote that, but allegedly directed, which certainly has his mark on it. The Indiana Jones movie. I was big into Star Wars. But I realized later more from I would go around with I'd record Empire Strikes Back particularly. I had that recorded on a cassette tape, and I would when I'd walk around my area, I would be listening to Yoda, and his even just his philosophy really resonated with me. I just thought it was really wise what he was saying. So like probably Star Wars was satisfying some kind of spiritual dimension that I had. And the Spielberg was more like um thing I could get my hands on. But I was always trying to replicate his shots and replicate the things that he was doing. Yeah. I guess if you want a top three, Jaws, weirdly, Midnight Cowboy was a big favorite of mine. I think I just, aside from just the acting and performances, I thought it was really well made. The editing, it's got really like almost pre-MTV style editing in some of those dream sequences, and I really or the improvisation. I really like the way the act of performances and things, and I don't know why that film really connected with me as well, which is weird because it's like totally opposite of those other movies I was into, which were more popcorn movies, I'd say. Evil Dead 2, it was also the era of El Mariachi. El Mariachi had a big influence on me, partly because it suddenly seemed possible that you could, with very little money, make a film that could break out. So that film kind of almost gave me a sort of a North Star of like, okay, that's where I can aim
Like with
for,
horror as well, I think, at least for me, you always have like a bit more of like freedom for like exploring your own creativity, because the genre is just so like versatile, and there's so many things that you could do with it. Absolutely. What then for you would make horror? You already mentioned the audience reaction, but like for you yourself as a
Mhm.
filmmaker, what makes a horror genre?
It's a tricky one because sometimes you're not in the reflective mode when you're doing it. You're just like, it's often later I've looked back and go, yeah, why was it so impactful? Why was I so drawn to it? So some people say trauma,
Okay.
Connor, it was trauma, and I'm like, really? Okay, let me break that down. But that's certainly not on your radar. If that is in fact the reason, certainly wouldn't be on the radar. For me, I don't know if you're just naturally inclined towards certain things. Like I found that, like I've tried to write other stuff and it's a bit of a slog, but when I'm in that like horror comedy genre, it's, it's like, it's not, I don't mean I'm just comfortable in it, but it kind of excites me, or the sparks start going, or usually if somebody sends me, if it's a horror comedy, like for example, Zombie Bashers, I didn't write that, but when Stephen Shields sent it to me, I knew what to do with it. Like I knew the tone of it. I could, I had a sense of I can add something to this.
When you make a movie, like is it first you're like, oh yeah, and then he like rips out like his throat and everybody like like at the blood like just comes gushing, and then you kind of like, how do we make that into like a comedic element in the film? Or is it you have like a joke in your head and then you write the horror around the joke?
So that's all over time. So I would say early on, it used to be like a clothesline of horror moments that I would work out first. So when I did my first featured Dead Meat, that was a zombie movie, and that was sort of built around locations and gory scenes. And then I kind of just, there were, you know, then these people who were probably just, when I was writing that script, this left, go, hey, runs in, and then I'd write the gory scene. So it certainly didn't start from a character point of view. And then over time, you realize that, um, you can't sustain that stuff for long if people aren't invested in the people. Or I think it was a quote I even read recently was like, somebody was asking Stephen King, what's the tip for writing a scary horror or something like that. And his tip was like, make people care about your characters. And so over time, so for example, Let the Wrong One In was much more came from a character place than my earlier films. Like the gore and stuff was definitely secondary to that. Like that even began, the idea was a Dublin vampire. Like, okay, what would a Dublin vampire do? And it was also more about kind of narcissistic codependent relationships. I was kind of writing about that. And I thought the vampire lended itself to that pretty well, of this idea that you're trying to get rid of somebody you've invited in, and you can complain about it and say, and there was a scene in it. There was a scene, and it really even happened to me. I was complaining about in my early 20s, had one or two of these slightly codependent relationships. And I remember complaining to a friend at the time, going, this person, like, they're always, calling me and da da da. And I was saying, they're such an idiot. And he was saying, who's an idiot? I'd say, oh, this person, they're such an idiot. Who's an idiot? I just kept saying, who's an idiot? And at that moment, there was this moment where I realized, oh, I'm the idiot. It's like, I'm answering the phone. I'm going along with what they're saying. I'm doing all that. And that was a powerful realization for me, because then I realized that their power had gone. Oh my God, I really have the control in that situation. And that was the core of that movie that I was trying to, I put that scene in the middle of it, but I wanted to be about somebody who thinks the vampire is controlling them. And they realize at some point that they're a
No,
participant
that's
in
really
this.
interesting. But I think it probably also relates back to what you said with the there is drama in horror, and also in horror comedies, because of the role. Like, like that is a theme that could be a drama, but then you build the vampire, like, narrative around it. And that's a really interesting take on it. Yeah, no, 100%. Like, it's so, yeah, no, like I think that's why like horror and like comedies as well are just such a, I don't know, like a brilliant mode of storytelling, because there's so much more to them than what meets the eye in, like, the first.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
so hard to write. You watch it and you're like, making people laugh is such a unique and, special ability. There's so many complexities to it. I really think that shouldn't be underestimated.
Comedy and horror are quite similar in that way that, like, a punchline is a bit like a hair. It requires a setup, a payoff. It's pretty clear if it works or not. And it in general, if a joke doesn't work, it's bad, because it's pretty obvious if it doesn't work. So there's a higher risk. Like, I did find, like, corrected some drama, and there's a greater latitude that for something to work, for it to work. Like, so I'm saying it's easier, but in a way the risks, the stakes are lower, like there's a huge variation in how to make a scene work if it's a drama. But in a comedy or horror, it's hard. It's more precise, because if it doesn't land, it really doesn't land. It's sort of, there's nothing worse than a comedy that's not funny.
It's brutal,
Like,
100%. I think both genres, as you pointed out, are very much about timing. And that would be one question. When you write these things, how do you get the timing right? Like, how do you, is it, like, do you have the whole like thing of like, show up late, leave early in your head? How do you approach writing something and keep timing in the back of your head?
well, like, it's interesting for me because I never kind of considered. I know I've written a lot, but I sometimes don't even consider myself a writer in that same way. As like, in a way, many ways, I've written out of necessity, to make stuff, to get to the directing point. And I'm doing less writing now, and I'm more co-writing and collaborating with other writers, and that's more effective, because I feel if I've, like, my natural, I guess you could say, what really sparks the thing for me is the visual aspect, or that part of storytelling. And I do enjoy writing and coming up with ideas and all that. I just think it's, I'm more effective if I'm collaborating generally. And then in terms of, that's more because I'm impatient, because I want to get to directing bit, So usually if I'm working with a writer, they temper my my sort of impatience to just get the thing done. So timing, I guess it's two things. One, like when I've written something, I'll always do a pass that's more, whether it's just in my imagination, I have to sort of picture the whole thing, like playing out like a film in my head, or I'll draw it. Like I literally draw most of it. With Let the Wrong One In, we almost filmed a lot of it just in rehearsal to figure some of those visual elements. And again, it usually makes the shooting more efficient. And we had the time because we were shut down for COVID, so we had this 6 months of time to just figure stuff out. And then I knew the location. Usually you can't do this too much because you might not have the location, but we knew where we were going to film. So if I was planning something, I knew it would be in that place. Um, so yeah, I think it's a mixture of a couple of things. I definitely think you can do a lot of the work in the script. Like the more and more I, go on, I realize, there's only so much you can do if the script isn't working. Like you kind of can't cover that over too much, but if it looks great or if it's fancy or whatever, what you want to be doing with the directing is enhancing something that's already good. That's the best. That's in the ideal, But yeah, in terms of timing, I think if it's a mixture, you got to write the scene, and then you got to spend that time just picturing it in your mind and just seeing all the beats play out, and then some of it's like pushing it further than you think. There's sometimes a tendency, and I don't know if you just might be writing and you just might be tired, and it's like, but you can sometimes really just try and wring every last ounce of tension out of it. Like I saw, like James Cameron did one of those, those lectures. What do you call them?
The master classes.
Yeah, masterclass. Yeah, he did a masterclass, and that was the one thing he was saying is like to milk the suspense, to milk it as much, because that's what the audience wants. They want to sustain that tension for as long as you can, and sometimes there's a tendency to not maximize that. So yeah, and that often comes to the writing, but also visualizing it and all that. So it's usually a few stages. Do you know what I mean? And then also on the day, just being open to working it out, and yeah, and then to make that work in the edit, you need the shots. Do you know what I mean? So you need to get the shots to make that work, because you're like, again, back to like Eisenstein in the whatever it was, the 1920s, expanding time, you're expanding time with the edit. And so, it's, if you don't have the shots, that's harder to do.
The storyboarding part, does that help you as a like you already mentioned when you're writing, you storyboard, it's then you're, like, do you put on your like director's hat while you storyboard as well, and then keep the editing thing in the back of your head as well?
I find there's two hats, and you kind of have to go between the two. One is where you sort of have to let the subconscious work, and you kind of just sort of lie back, and you're sort of more daydreaming about it, and you're sort of letting, it's more a floaty process. And then you kind of have to do the grind, which is like, if you're going to sit down and draw storyboards, that's a hell of a lot of little drawings that you've got to do. But it really irons out a lot of things. I think basically what you have to do is, like, sometimes you get an idea and you go, oh, that'd be a great idea, right? But you haven't brought it down into sort of reality yet. It's sort of floaty. So, okay, so the script is the first phase of that. Then when you draw the storyboards, you have to start answering questions about, okay, it's 4 people in a room. Okay, now where are they? Like, when you draw the pictures, it's like you start to have to answer more questions about that scene, about where the people are. Then you start noticing continuity things that you might have sort of skimmed over in the script. It's like, oh, the person was over there by the door, and now how am I going to get them over there? So it starts to reveal things that you haven't thought through yet. So, each stage is like closer and closer to what's going to be there on the day. So I find it catches a lot of things that you might not have thought of, or you might have
I
skimmed
suppose
in
it
the
kind of
script.
ties in with the whole like visual aspect of film, because what I noticed writing scripts, I sometimes lean too much into the whole prose, like genre, where it's like I'm not writing a novel, like this is a film, so it has to, you're kind of like going through the images in your head, and I suppose with storyboarding you're already bringing in that visual aspect and working that out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because like, I mean, yeah, we were taught that in college. Like, they just, one of our lectures would be just like cross out all your adjectives. He was like, like someone will write, it's a beautiful, golden sunset and blah blah blah. And then it's like, it's gonna be whatever the weather is on the day it's
Yeah.
scheduled. And I that's what you're gonna get. So there is a practicality with film. Now, there's a balance. Sometimes that can, point towards the mood or what you're trying to capture. But um I find, yeah, I guess I've grown up just writing scripts and being practical about it. So I tend not to have that issue, if you know what I mean. I've no desire to be more flowery than it needs to be, to get the point across. But then when I work with other writers, I can see how sometimes that benefits, or it gives more of an impression of what the production design should be, or the mood of the film. And so I think there's
Do you
sometimes a
read
balance
other
there.
people's scripts, or do you just watch the films to get like a sense of like what's out there? Like, or do you just already have like your distinct like style and that's it?
Um, I don't read a lot of scripts, being honest. I read scripts, like if people send me scripts to, if they want me to direct something, I'll read it. Um, and I probably don't read as many scripts as I should, maybe, in terms of learning. I mean, I did a lot of that. I kind of overdosed on a lot of the script stuff. Like I really went down, like if you talk about script structure
Mm-hmm.
and, all those books and, story, and Michael Ardent, who he's done some great stuff on story structure. Um, so I've read so much about that stuff, and it's all really useful. And sometimes it's a distraction from, or sometimes it takes you away from just actually sitting down and writing. Like there's certain things you just, uh, you're searching for a magic formula that's gonna make the thing easy. And each one is a new challenge, and each one has its own problems. And that stuff is great to go back and sometimes it unlocks something, but it's never the magic formula that you think it's going to be.
Okay, then moving more towards directing, what drew you? Because you were already mentioning that you have this really visual approach to film and looking how like the shots work on screen. What then drew you like to directing?
Well, it's more one that it's evolved over time, because it's like, I suppose my initial films I was making my friends were, purely visual in their nature. Like I wasn't really paying much attention to the acting or the performances. And that's something that became much more prominent, like say post college, probably after I'd done my first feature. It was starting to become, because there was this weird transition. If you're making stuff as a kid, like you're generally playing, like all your friends are playing adults, and there's this sort of inherent kind of, like a lot of time when people are enjoying them, they're also enjoying this, like the funniness of us being kids playing adults. And so it has this layer of humor that suddenly, as I started to make films when I was like, say, 18, 19, and we were getting real people to play the right roles, there was suddenly this comedy that wasn't there anymore. And I was like, how come this doesn't work? Like it's not working in the same way that it used to. And so there was this transition then of going, okay. And then it was like, okay, now you've got to start, like in college, they'd encourage us to use actors who weren't our friends and people who acting was what they wanted to do. And I'd never really, like beyond going, walk over there, say your line, do that, like that aspect of directing, I'd never like flexed that muscle at all. So that was the big challenge for me. And so I went to acting classes like myself just to figure that. Like I needed to figure that out because I was scared of actors. Like, being honest, when I came out of college, I was like, I don't know the language to communicate. And you, and in some ways you had all these warped ideas of what it was like, I need to be able to talk. Like, you'd see people and you'd imagine directing was talking for 20 minutes about these, like, I don't know, deep things about the character and all that. And then you realize you do that and the actor's eyes are glazing over. And when I went to acting, like the acting classes, I realized how quick a good direction could be, or also how little you can take on if you're about to do like a scene. Your brain, if someone's talking to you for 10 minutes, you just can't absorb all that information. So what you want is something very specific or something clear about, and being precise is a lot better than, and sure, you can talk in depth and stuff, but that can happen maybe in a more like, in a rehearsal period but when you're directing on set, you've so little time that you're just trying to, you're trying to be quite precise about what you want. And that was tricky. And the thing is, I learned as well, like when I was doing a drama thing for TV, like when you have a big crew and stuff, like your only job or your one job is to direct the actors. It's the one job no one else is doing. Like obviously you can be involved in the camera work, but even if you weren't, someone's taking care of that. So the one job there's nobody else there for is the actors and working with the actors. And so that's been the evolution for me. And now, like, I've kind of come full circle to, because partly when I got into that, I abandoned a bit of my obsession with the camera work and the not abandon it, but it became secondary. And now I've kind of figured, like, because I teach acting as well, and a lot of what I teach is blocking and movement with the camera. And so it's kind of almost come full circle back again, because I've realized how the two things enhance both enhance each other. You know what I mean? Like the technical aspect doesn't get in the way of the performance, or it shouldn't, because there was a period where, I can't remember working with one actor and, him saying, "Oh, I find that boom is very distracting." It's like, well, sorry. I mean, it's recording your voice. You like, part of your job is to you got to work within the limitations of technical thing. That's what we're doing. But it's also that idea that um, the limitations of hitting marks and blocking, that if you work within that, it can really enhance the whole thing. Or movement that feels maybe unnatural, but okay, it makes the shot work, but also it can make the performance work. So, yeah, I literally, like, that's sort of those kind of two aspects have kind of come together.
Yeah. Like acting then, and teaching acting, like how, like what got you, like was it the directing that got you into that? Like just to get a better understanding of what's happening on set, or did your interest come from there?
I think it's a bit of both. Like the thing with filmmaking is you're not doing it as much as you would like ever, because the development of films takes a long time. So there are these massive periods between projects where you're not actually directing. Like I've often thought about, if a plumber came to your house and you were like, "When was the last time you fixed the sink there?" And you were like, "Well, 3 years ago," you'd be like a bit worried. And so it be this thing with directing where it's like, how do I keep flexing that muscle, And for me, working with actors is a thing that, because in a way it's like the most important thing, but it's also the thing that you can do. Like I like, it began with me doing my own classes just online during COVID. I was just doing like, and weirdly it forced me, because again, you're limited online about what you can do with actors. You can't do blocking, you can't do anything technical. So it forced me to do a lot of the stuff maybe I hadn't been doing, which is a bit more like the getting more involved with the characters, talking more about that, trying different things. Like in classes, you can try, you know, like say one, like there's lots of different directing techniques you read about. Like one might be using action verbs as a direction. And, you know, in a class environment, you can really go, okay, let's try it. Today we're going to try action verbs. Here's a bunch of action verbs. And be really kind of, at the start, it's clunky, you know? It's like when you're learning anything, you're being quite clunky about it. It's like, okay, there's a beat in a scene. Let's just try this action verb. And then you can see sometimes it's impressive how it feels clunky and yet somehow it just triggered something and it really works. And like there's something about directing, I think it's kind of like what people say, like alchemy or something. Like you can never figure it out completely. There's never a formula, because I can teach the same class with a bunch of different people and sometimes it really works and sometimes it doesn't. So there's no like, you know, it's more you're dealing with energies and kind of, and just being present and just the kind of combination of people, you know, so it's not precise. And yet at the same time, there's tools you can use to unlock that. And sometimes it's about, okay, that one didn't work. I'll try this. So I may try in the class 4 or 5 different things. So it might be, okay, let's try action verbs. Let's try, I don't know, it might be a secret direction. I might give them all a secret that the other people don't know and see how that influences the scene. Or it might be, whatever, like all those different things. And I found the blocking interesting because it's the one thing that a lot of actors don't get taught in acting school, because, you know, they tend to, uh, you know, I guess a lot of their scenes are, you know, fairly static. Like, do you know what I mean? Like they're not, maybe theater's a bit different, but I found that I think it's also because it's hard. Like it's taken me a long time to understand blocking and the movement between actors and camera work and how all that works. So I found if you block a scene well, it almost gets a lot of the job done. It answers a lot of the questions about how the scene should be played if you stage it correctly, you know? So, and that's much more useful, I think, to an actor than sitting down and talking for hours on about what the scene might be about. It's like, put it on its feet. The relationships are implied by, or the dynamics are implied by, you know, if you move 2 people closer together, they're suddenly going to perform it differently than if you move them apart. So you can kind of roll the scene in this really interesting way. And if you marry that with the camera movement, then you can really like get something kind of that's harder to get if it's just coverage. Do you know what I mean? You know, just everybody sit around and they'll get close-ups and get the wide shot. But I mean, it takes longer, as you know, that's the payoff. But you know, I'm enjoying being more comfortable doing all that and being able to then bring that onto a set, because like I've practiced it a lot, say in classes and stuff. And usually you'd shy away. Like sometimes I'd practice that stuff because I've always loved this Spielberg movie since I was a kid. And so whenever I would go to make a movie, I'd always have these ambitions about the kind of shots I was going to pull off. And then I'd see how hard it is. Like, and it isn't just even the actors. It's getting the whole camera crew on board to you know, doing these slightly more complicated shots. And usually you'd back out halfway through. You know, there's a point where you feel that it's not working, you know, and it's like, and you kind of go, oh, okay, I'll just shoot the wide and the close-ups because you know that'll work. But if you push through, you know, and you get those shots working, you know, they can really pay off.
Like, what do you think, like, teaching actors, like, what has teaching taught you about directing?
I think it's taught me that people will generally be as open for you as you are with them. Like, I think if you're not willing to be opener to go there, then they won't either. So you have to you have to be as vulnerable, or you have to be as willing to, because what you're asking actors to do is make themselves very vulnerable. And I'll generally try and, like, if there's something I'm asking them to do, like, or even if it's a game we're doing, or if it's like, I'll try and do it myself, or like, if um so there is, so I think, what did I say, that, don't ask someone to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. So there's an element of that. And sometimes it can just be like, if the scene is about something, like, for example, like I was talking about the vampire film earlier, like, I might just talk about, which I probably did with the actors, like, oh, this is my personal experience about this thing. And I'm not asking them to talk about it, but I'm just trying to be open about it, or what I see in it. And probably naturally they will anyway, so I think that's one thing. Um, I think as a director, your job sometimes is like, I remember once I was directing a guy, and like, he was a really good actor, and I always got like really good performances out of him. And he went to, he went, he was directing someone else's film, Now, I never felt I was directing this guy. We just kind of got along, and, it was always easy, and he was in someone else's film. And I remember watching it, and it didn't really work, or he wasn't quite as good in it. And I was like, and I was curious, because I was like, what happened there? And he said, "Oh, I just missed you laughing behind the camera." Do you know? Because I used to find it really funny. And like, in a way, that was, I didn't think it was directing, but in a way that was me being his audience, or supporting him, and it was just me enjoying what he was doing, and that was enough. So sometimes it's like, directing isn't, again, it's not as, like what I would have.
Formulaic. It's
Yeah.
more energies
Yes.
that you kind of you get along. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And then at the same time, you got to do, again, it's the cliche, you got to do your work on the scene. Like, I always find the more you work on the scene, even if you don't use it, maybe it just relaxes you, or you're more comfortable with trying different things. So you've got to, like, have ideas about the scene, I think. Um, but then also, again, it's like being open. Again, the usual, what happens on the day, but what else with actors? Um, yeah, I think they're probably the main things, um, yeah, yeah, it's just that they're human as well. You know what I mean? They're just people, and you can talk to them like people. I think, again, back in college, I thought there was some secret language. There was some, yeah, and they've studied lots of plays in college. So they're gonna, like, and I don't know those plays, and I'm gonna be sound stupid, or this kind of thing. And yeah, yeah, no. So yeah, it is that thing. But then also, like, the other thing is, like, trust is a big thing. Like, I remember
Mhm.
I was doing a TV show, and I was doing a couple of sketches, and I remember one of the actresses, after a couple days, we did a scene, and something wasn't working, but I was like, "Oh yeah, it's good, okay, we'll move on." And she said to me, "You think everything's good?" And I realized, I was like, she didn't quite trust when I was saying it was good, and so the next day we were doing another scene, and something wasn't working, and I was thinking to myself, I can't say it's good, that's me wrong, because, it's like, uh, she's not going to believe me. But then I remember just saying, like, I don't know. Like, I remember saying, I don't know why this isn't working, but I don't think it is. And within 5 minutes, like, somebody threw out an idea, someone else threw out an idea, and we'd solved the thing. And then suddenly it sparked something in my head, and I was like, okay, what about this? And we'd figured it out. And it was just that idea of, saying it's good, move on, was closing all the doors, and saying I don't know, like, opened the door for other people to collaborate, for other people to throw in ideas. And so it's that thing as well. It's like, you don't have to know all the answers. Like, often just asking actors questions is, is, it's like, why are they doing that? But I don't necessarily need to know the answer. Um, So you don't have to know all the answers, I guess, is another thing. And you can use questions to figure it out. Because I think people can tell if you're just like saying it's good when it's not, and they know it's not, and you know it's not. And now everyone's lost trust, and you're just going through the motions now, you know? Whereas your job, like you have to learn to say what you feel. And that can be hard sometimes because you're also trying to do that in a way that's sensitive and isn't gonna like, knock their confidence. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being empathetic, when giving feedback.
Yeah. So that's delicate. But sometimes, sometimes it's like you can be in a jokey way, like, or whatever. Like you can find, I suppose everybody finds their own personality will come out. And I don't think that's a thing. I think that's probably unique to everybody about how they do that. But finding a way to be honest, I think, is important. Yeah.
That's actually, I also find, like what you brought up with the not having to know everything is such a good, like, great point, and like, like opening up doors for other people to come in and, share ideas. It's something I sometimes feel like, there's not, I don't know, like we should be more okay with not knowing things. And it's not like, it's not a bad thing not to know something, and just, like ask people questions because, and so because it's so collaborative. I think that's actually a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah. You
that you
can
made there.
sometimes feel everyone relaxing all of a sudden. It's like, and
And we're all people.
yeah. It's like, let's figure this out together, And then sometimes as well, with actors, it's just telling them what you're going to do. Like, because sometimes you forget that, especially if it's someone coming in for a day, they might, they're probably like, am I going to have one take in this, or how is it going to work? Or, sometimes it's just like telling people what you're going to do. Like, we'll probably do 5 or 6 takes, we'll probably, but like, if you want to, or just like, if you want to like, improv a bit, or if you want to like, you because there could be somebody there going, I have a great idea, but I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, or, you know what I mean? So I want to give people the space for if they've got something they want to share,
How many, just out of curiosity now, how many takes do you usually kind of get, like, with a film? I know it probably, like, for TV, it's fewer, or like, with 5, 6. I mean, probably also depends on the project, right?
Generally. Yeah, I think generally you've got it by that. I think the most, you might, like, if it ever goes into 20 or something, it's usually because it's something technical.
Like, was it fake blood? Would that even
Well,
be a
well,
thing where you could like have 20 like retakes?
no, like generally with that, you've got 2 or 3 resets, so because you've got it depends on how bloody it is now, but sometimes with all the clear up and everything, you just don't really have the time or the extra costumes. So they tend to be, put more thought into it, and then trying to get it. But yeah, if it's something just very specific, you find like, often I really try and get the rehearsal if I can, because more often than not, they might do it in the first one as well,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know, but that's brilliant then. Yeah. With the like, how many liters of like fake blood did you use on the vampire film? Do you know?
No, but I probably did at the time, but I've probably forgotten. There was quite a bit in that kitchen, all right. I was always excited when that guy came in with his canister of blood, it was going to be
What are they like? What is it made of these days? Was it like sugar? No, syrup?
In some of them, he had alcohol as well. In
Oh, wow.
certain ones, I don't know, was that to tin it or something.
Bloody Marys.
Yeah, and it's like, but I think that was usually when it wasn't getting sprayed in the actor's faces,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Probably for the best
Yeah.
if you. Yeah. you have a busy day ahead of you. But I have one last question, I think. If that's all right. What's the horror comedy that you want to see, like coming up? Like, what's the film that you'd love to see in the future? Like something that maybe hasn't been made yet. Werewolves in Dublin next to it.
Yeah, like I mean, it's kind of funny. Like there's definitely stuff I'm working on, and I know other people are working on, which is like, and I haven't gotten around to it in like, even though it was probably the earliest stuff I was writing, which was stuff more like folklore horror stuff. Like even when I was in college, I was making sort of folklore-y kind of horror movies, and
Yeah.
it's weird how almost like they are quite popular now, but it's weird how sometimes like people forget how long it takes to get a film made, and how often, you can have an idea 10 years ago. Like I was working on, a witch film 10 years ago, and nobody was making witch films or wanted to make witch films. And then suddenly witch films are like really popular, or they go through this. And then you're like, geez, well, if I make my witch film now, it's like, it's like, I'm not only missed the curve, I'm like, past it now. So same with folklore stuff. It's like there's still stuff in that area that I really am excited to make, just because you feel like you're part of what I guess used to be a tradition passed on with storytellers, and that's dying out. And it feels like, filmmaking is a way to kind of keep that going, or to certainly bring it,
Revive it in the sense.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So that would definitely be, and I know there's definitely been a couple of those films made already. Yeah, there's a couple of like ideas like that, but then it's just about like, how long it takes to get something, raise the funding, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd love to do a scary horror. Like I've done a good bit of comedy horror, but I think the stuff I'd like to do next is creepy horror. I'm also working on a TV show with another guy, Des McMahon, and he's a psychic medium, and he's written a TV series called The Light Worker, and it's about his experience as working as a psychic medium, in missing person cases. And like that's something I'd love to do, because it's I wouldn't say horror, like it's a drama with supernatural elements, but also a true story, also has humor, so that would be something new for me, in that way, like a TV series, and also something with more like, more dramatic elements, I guess, which I'm excited to, especially having worked with, again, like I say, I work with actors a lot, and like, most of what we do in the classrooms are dramatic scenes. We're not doing blood splattery scenes in classrooms. So, I do something of it, and, I'd be excited to do more of it on screen,
Yeah, thank you so much.
So we are very grateful to Coimisiún Meán for supporting this episode, and thank you so much for listening. To get a sense of the work we do, head on over to filmireland.ie.